Hello and welcome to another edition of 41 Files here from 41 Action News, the first 41 Files recorded in 2019. Happy New Year to all of our listeners out there. Glad that you're joining us for another year of 41 Files. This is year two we're moving into. Joined as always by digital producer Sam Hartle. Hi, Sam. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. Episode 40.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I'd lost count.
I think balloons drop when we do episode 41.
I think so, too.
Oh, yeah. They make fun of me in the morning, Lindsay Anderson does, especially because I say anytime she says the temperature is 41 degrees, I want to treat it like Pee-wee's Playhouse and make
the word of the day, right? Yeah.
That kind of thing.
I can't even talk about Pee Wee Herman. He gives me nightmares. He's like the scariest children's character of all time.
That's 41 Action News reporter Kat Reed joining us, too. Kat, why does Pee Wee Herman give you nightmares?
Well, first of all, his conduct outside of the Playhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
second
bad.
of all,
No,
like
that's
his
bad.
voice and just the way he looks. Like he looks like he's been locked in like some sort of attic for years. I mean,
You're not wrong about
we've
that.
locked him in the attic for years now.
You're not wrong about that.
Was that his shtick, or is that a real if you went and had a beer with him?
No, that was a shtick. That was all
So he's,
character.
like somewhat normal. Besides
again,
other things.
other than the extracurricular content of that, yes, he was supposed to be a normal person. We are hoping to be joined by 41 Action News reporter Stephen Dial some point during our conversation as well. He got busy this morning and had to head out for a minute, but we think either that or he took a nap, or he's upset still that Georgia lost to Texas in the Sugar Bowl. So that's all possible. We're talking today about the new year and things that are coming to Kansas City in 2019 and things that we could see as far as big changes in 2019. And potentially there could be a lot. There are large ticket items on the docket for 2019, so to speak. And Kat Reed, you are well versed in definitely a couple of them when it comes to KCI and the airport changes there and the mayoral race that's going to be happening this year. Let's start with the airport because we still expect in this month to get the first step of the airport really going, right?
well, that was the expectation, but a small update. We've been waiting on the environmental assessment to come back, that's a lot of federal mumbo jumbo, but basically that's the step that we need to actually break ground out of the new KCI. And the environmental assessment, they were hoping to have ready, signed, sealed, delivered by next week, hopefully, when City Council reconvenes. They'll be doing an airport committee meeting. But there's this thing called the federal government shutdown that you may have heard of that is impacting things. And so
we're in day 12 right now.
Day 12. And so Deputy Aviation Director Justin Meyer had mentioned on Twitter, we thought that the government shutdown could have an impact on that. And because it still hasn't been resolved, it's going to have an impact on getting the environmental assessment back.
Wow.
Yeah,
it didn't occur to me that that's a federal thing, the environmental aspect. That didn't occur to me, but obviously it should be.
The FAA has to take a look at that. So that's one aspect. The other thing that we still are waiting on is the agreement from the airlines.
Yep.
Last year we did a lot of coverage about a couple of the smaller carriers, Spirit and Allegiant.
On cost.
Yes, it's too expensive. The overall price tag, as well as the way it's divided, we're not okay with this. So it was more than just the baggage claim that was initially put out there as the reason that they
the
couldn't
cost of the
decide.
baggage system at the airport.
Exactly. And so they are still working on getting that agreement. Now, to be clear, not every single airline has to sign on to the agreement.
Okay.
Pat Klein was saying that he's hoping, there are 8, hoping to get, I believe it was
that
like
fly
5.
out of KCI right now.
Yes. Hoping to get like 5 or 6 of them to sign on. So he had mentioned last time I spoke with him, but that the nature of these agreements is that some smaller carriers don't sign on to them, which was something new that I had not been familiar with. But anyway, that is still something we don't, at this point, no one has signed.
So there's no chance, though, stepping, maybe skipping a step here. There's not a chance that one of the smaller airlines is going to be able to hold up the entire process by saying, no, we don't agree with any of this. We can't do it, even though all the rest of them have said it, if that were to happen, that kind of thing.
Yes, that's how I understand it to be from talking with the aviation director, Pat Klein. And so we're still waiting on that agreement, and that's got to be voted then through City Council, which takes time. It has to go through committee, and it has to go to the full council for a vote. And so they had hoped to break ground by the end of January, but they can't do that without the environmental assessment or the airlines agreement.
Yeah.
So how quickly will those things move? Will they still be able to break ground in January is kind of unclear right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the latest in the airport world. Very exciting story full of twists and turns.
And, you know, we've heard from people like the mayor who have talked about, you know what, this is not just an easy process of flipping a switch. Whenever I think that maybe voters have gotten, not spoiled is the right word, but expecting a certain thing. Well, we approved it, let's go. Just because you've approved it doesn't mean that's the dominoes can all start falling. They're things that we couldn't even do until it was approved by voters. And now that we've done that, you know, it takes a little while to build a $2 billion airport.
It does. And I think people are finding that out very quickly. And, you know, if there's a delay on the groundbreaking, that means it'll be later, you know, for the terminal to arrive. And people already are disappointed that it's creeping into early 2023 for that opening.
And just to touch on something else you mentioned, too, if you're not familiar with some of the previous reporting we've done, you can find a lot of this on our website, kshb.com. Kat has done lots of stories on the airport. But if you're not familiar, when you're talking about the airline agreement discrepancies, some of the smaller airlines, correct me if I'm wrong, have said, we don't know if we should be carrying as much of the price tag as some of the larger airlines because we don't operate on such a scale as they do. Maybe they should pay more than we do. And that's kind of the disagreement right now, is how much everyone's going to pay for a piece of the pie.
That's part of it. But then they also said they had an issue with the overall price tag.
Okay.
So not just the allocation of cost, but the overall price tag. And they said that they would have to raise prices, you know, for consumers in Kansas City, and that it would make it it would prevent them from operating in Kansas City, essentially.
Well, so obviously that's one of the big things that is not going to end in 2019. But I would hope that I think everyone involved in this would hope that by this time next year, we may be saying that phrase a lot during this particular edition of 41 Files, by this time next year, that the airport is well underway and being constructed. You know, by the beginning of 2020, we should be able to say, no, we can kind of see the skeleton of it, and this has been torn down, this has started. That's the goal for everyone, right?
Yes, I think so. Everyone wants the new airport, especially if you've been there late at night and forced to have a protein bar as your dinner in the terminal.
Right.
If you've had a layover
there needs to be better options than protein bars. That's a good thing. So sticking with the theme of what's happening this year and transportation, let's talk about the streetcar a little bit, because that's something a lot of people are excited about, of bringing it all the way to the river. And we've talked about that. We actually talked about that this morning a little bit on 41 Action News today, that the city is hoping to get a lot of funding from the FTA. That's the Federal Transit Authority, I believe. And we're talking about $151 million, I think, is what they're hoping to get to help pay for this. Is that right?
Yes. And to be clear, there are two different extensions that we're talking about.
Okay.
The one that they're asking for $151 million for is the extension to UMKC Main Street extension, which voters, you know, had approved.
Have already approved
some
that.
of the funding mechanism for that. So there are some local funds identified, but they want the federal funding to get the rest of that done. Donna Mandelbaum, who's communications manager for the streetcar, said that the early things she's heard back from the feds are very positive, that they seem to like the project, and so things look good. They would hear back in the early part of this year. So really, we're just kind of waiting for that. Of course, there's a government shutdown.
Right.
As
Again, anything with the word federal or letter F in it right now is probably not going to be working very quickly.
Exactly. So there's that. And so that's one aspect. The second aspect is the extension to the riverfront, which I don't know if you remember, but a couple months ago, or early December, there was the announcement of all those build grants, $25 million grants. One went to the Buck O'Neill Bridge, one went to a project in KCK.
Yes.
Well, the extension to the riverfront had applied for one of those and didn't get it.
Yeah.
So they were a little disappointed. They were hoping to secure that to extend. But all hope is not lost for them. They've been working with the Port Authority of Kansas City, Port KC, and they're working to identify some other funding sources. They think that they could have a funding plan ready to go by this spring. And part of that involves the funding mechanism would involve leveraging some of the real estate and land owned by the Port KC, some development opportunities that could help pay for that.
Do you get a sense that either of those particular extensions are maybe not more important, but are weighted more than the other ones? Like one would be a bigger deal than the other one? Do you get that sense at all?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Main Street extension is the big ticket item, what people are really excited about, because there are people who live closer to the river and would take it to the river. But
Sure.
I think for the majority of people who are hoping to use the streetcar day to day, the Main Street UMKC extension would make more of a difference.
Yeah.
You live in Midtown, you can get on, you can get to P&L. People go to the riverfront, but it's not as big. I feel like people are more likely to get on, like to go to River Market
Yeah.
or to connect to some of those locations.
I think it also is the UMKC involvement is very big as far as their interest in expanding where their students are able to live easily and being able to tell their students, listen, you've got free transportation. Presumably it will still be free once this is all going on, but you've got at very best free transportation, at least if it were ever to change, low cost transportation, basically to living in lots of other places in the city to be able to come to school on this campus.
Yeah, and it would just give people an opportunity to explore so much more of the city. I mean, we have buses, but I think
Sure.
that there is obviously an attraction to the streetcar and the idea of the streetcar.
Yeah.
People would want to ride that to get places, and it'd be cool to see more people actually able to use it to get to where they're going. Because
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, for instance, me, if I wanted to take the streetcar, I would have to either take a bus or drive to Union Station first and then get on the streetcar.
Yeah, there's the novelty aspect to it. Whenever you have people come and visit you in Kansas City, you don't say, hey, let's go hop on the bus and take a tour. I mean, and not to speak poorly of the bus or anything
No.
like that, but it's different than what a lot of cities have. It's comparable at least to something like New Orleans and their streetcar, where it's this cool thing. I went down to the city and got on this streetcar and rode around, and you can say that. I was at the Winter Wonder Fest or whatever it's called at World of Fun a few weeks ago, and there was a vendor there selling T-shirts, and one of the T-shirts was the streetcar line for Kansas City, the outline of the streetcar line for Kansas City. And, you see all these novelty T-shirts for the T-shirt for the city and that kind of thing. But it's a point of, hey, this is cool and different about us, and that's part of the allure of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So there you go with transportation. Those are two of the big ticket options for our stories for 2019 that we're following between the airport and the streetcar. One thing you may not have mentioned there on the streetcar, Kat, is obviously the shutdown notwithstanding. Is the funding the next thing we're supposed to hear from on the streetcar? The yes or no on that $151 million? That's the next thing?
Yes, although
Okay.
there will also be some public meetings later this month, and I think into February, at which they'll have some new renderings and some more details on the route. But which I know people love renderings, but it's just a picture if you don't have the money
Absolutely.
to pay for it.
And I think that's another good point. I think that both of these stories that we're talking about kind of bounce off each other a little bit. You people get a little bit rendering sick, and it's like, listen, I love that we have all these great big ideas, but nothing's happening. And especially when they're in that same vein of transportation and people wondering about when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? I think the slowness gets exacerbated by the slowness of the other potentially.
Yes, and I do want to say I'm really sorry to the people who wanted it, but I don't think that a barbecue sauce fountain or a Boulevard beer fountain is going to happen at the new terminal. I know those were some ideas thrown out. Sadly, I don't think we can make those a reality.
I'm sorry, what? These are things that were suggested?
These were things that people were tweeting.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's what would you rather have, a Boulevard beer fountain or a barbecue sauce fountain?
Definitely a Boulevard fountain.
Yeah, that seems more kind of universal for what you may or may not need to go with your protein bar at the airport whenever you're there. Barbecue sauce is not going to go with that, but Boulevard beer would go with it. So those are the two the big ticket options stories for 2019 transportation wise. The other one is that we're going to have a new mayor this time next year, and this feels like it's been going on for a long time. I've been here for a little over a year now, and we've been talking about the mayoral race basically since I got here. So we're finally ramping up, and really probably going to ramp up pretty quickly now because the election's in April.
Yes.
That feels like I don't know why, but it feels like there's a big difference between December or November to April and January to April. Once you get in the same calendar year as the election, the intensity picks up. Do you get that feeling whenever you look at this race and talk to the candidate?
I do. I feel like right now, because we're just getting out of the holidays, it's still, there's a little bit of a lull.
Yeah.
But over the next month, you'll start to see a lot. You're starting to see some more ads and things on Facebook. I can't believe that it's April.
Yeah. This is not a November election.
So far away
this is
for
very
so
quickly.
long, and so I think it is going to ramp up. We had so much intrigue in the first few months of this election. You had, of course, Jason Kander coming into the race, Jolie Justice dropping out of the race, then Jolie coming back. Once Kander dropped out, then Quinton Lucas having his arrest. It's just been kind of a wild ride. But honestly, I feel like the airport issue, there might already be some fatigue on the mayoral race.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people are just ready for the primary, for the initial election to be over so they can just focus on the runoff.
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of the feeling I'm getting from people. There are so many candidates.
9 right now that are running for mayor in Kansas City. So obviously we're not going to have a winner. We're not going to know who the mayor is after the April election with 9 people running. Do you feel like, and this is kind of a prediction question for you, and I hope that you don't mind, do you feel like, because part of the question we've talked about with Mayor James going out and him having a working knowledge of so many of the candidates in the race being city council members was if he was ever going to publicly back anyone. Do you see Mayor James at any point this year getting involved in saying, this is who I support to be the next mayor of Kansas City?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I don't think it'll happen before the primary, the initial. I think that it might happen in the runoff. I could see him, if we're down to 2, going out there and speaking on it.
If you're, since you're out there on that limb, I'll ask you again, do you think there's anybody, do you think you know who that would be if he were to support somebody?
I think it would be Jolie Justice.
Okay.
Just because they've worked pretty hand in hand, especially when it comes to the airport.
Sure.
Being the chair of the committee, I think that they're very like-minded on some of those issues, and so they have a pretty close relationship, and I could see that being it.
Okay. Now, as far as the tone of the election as we get closer to April, it's definitely tough to differentiate yourself when you're in a 9-person race. Do you see there being more, I guess, what do you see the election looking like between now and April from a procedural standpoint? Do you see more forums? Do you see more debates? What do you think we should see as voters? What should voters expect just so we can learn the difference between these 9 people in the next 3.5 months or so? What should we see or expect to see in the next couple of months?
I think that there will be a lot more debates, a lot more forums. You'll, of course, see maybe some TV ads, and you'll see your Facebook ads. I feel like social media ads are going to be pretty big. We've seen that just in the past couple of years as a national trend, seeing more suggested posts and sponsored posts on Facebook. I think that there are several issues that have already come up that I think are going to continue in the campaign. I think you're going to hear a lot more still about affordable housing, which has been a hot topic for a couple of years now in Kansas City. I think tax incentives are going to continue to be a big thing. And how do you incentivize development while still maintaining equity, equality? I think that that's a big issue. And then I also think still bridging the divide in Kansas City, east and west of Troost. I don't think that that's an issue that can go away, and that'll continue. So I think, the search for a mayor who will move Kansas City forward, but will do so equally with benefits to everyone is the big issue.
Well, I hate to keep asking you all these questions, but Stephen Dial has yet to show up, so he must still be out on his story. But while we're talking politics, there is one other issue that I want to ask you about that's not necessarily Kansas City-based, but it is new for 2019, and there's a new governor in Kansas, and Laura Kelly will take over in Kansas in the next couple of weeks. She has talked about education being big for her. What do you see during the first year of Laura Kelly administration as she gets ready to take the governor's mansion?
She has said that she wants to be the education governor, so that is going to be, I think, first and foremost. But she's also looking a lot at infrastructure, is what she told me is a priority, as well as looking at Department of I'm blanking on the full name, Department of Children
and Family Services.
Services. She's wanted to really look at that as well. I think that she's had an interesting start so far. If you look at her transition team, she did have a Republican on it.
Okay.
So she has prioritized bipartisanship in some ways, but there was a little bit of criticism. She did not go to D.C. to meet with the president,
right.
as many other governors did, Democrats and Republicans. So there are some people, I think, who are saying, well, what about working across the aisle? How about that? She maintains she was just very busy and had a lot to do in Kansas. So
take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, take that for what it's worth. Maybe
anytime you're invited to the White House, it's tough to say I'm very busy.
I'm very busy. I'm sorry, but I think that I don't know if that's necessarily a reflection of whether or not she'll work with Republicans in the state of Kansas itself. So I think that it's been really interesting, too, because with her being elected, you've seen all of those female moderate Republicans switch to the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I feel like she has kind of opened up she's presented this kind of model and path forward of being a Democrat, but being more moderate and bipartisan. And so maybe a lot of women and lawmakers have seen a new place in the Democratic Party for them. So yeah, it's been interesting already. I think that, though, education is going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Which, too bad we don't have Ariel Rothfield here because she is deep
all
into that issue.
Yep. Well, it's obviously a big deal. That was made very clear to me. I said I've only been here for a year, but that was made very clear to me because I live on the Kansas side. I have children in the Kansas City or in the Kansas public schools. So that was made clear to me already by both here at work and by teachers I interact with and that kind of thing, it being a big deal. So obviously that's a big part of it. So lots of changes on the horizon for 2019 for Kansas City. Still talking politics. We're talking about Josh Hawley being in the Senate now for Missouri. Obviously a new governor with Laura Kelly in Kansas, a new mayor for Kansas City. It's going to be a presidential election year next year, but we saw the first senator drop in with Elizabeth Warren saying she's going to form an exploratory committee. So I would think probably before the end of 2019, we could have some presidential candidates visiting Kansas City. It could be a big year politically.
That's true. And this is kind of an interesting anecdote, but we already had a Democrat in the race for 2020 who announced a while ago, before Elizabeth Warren.
Okay.
John Delaney is his
that's
name.
right. From Maryland, right?
From Maryland.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, his daughter is one of my very good friends who I went to school with.
I do believe it. You're connected everywhere, Kat. I do believe that.
So he's been really busy in Iowa, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him sooner rather than later. And it's going to be a really big year. We've had the president come so many times already.
I mean, I feel like I'm losing count how many times the president's been to Missouri and Kansas.
It's like, the president's here again. No.
Right.
There's always a lot of excitement
another
around
presidential visit. So it'll be a big year. So, obviously we kind of got wrapped up in transportation and politics talk for 2019 there during this podcast, but those are two of the big issues that we're facing in 2019 for Kansas City. So hopefully this time in a year, Kat, we will be able to say definitively some things about all of these topics. We'll have a much better feel, and it won't be so projection speaking wise in a year.
Yes, and I do want to ask. I know that this is kind of a look back, and into the previous year, but you've had a jam-packed year.
Oh my gosh, yes.
41 Action News. When was your start date?
I started in 2017. Just before November 6, 2017. So 2018 was my first full calendar year at 41 Action News.
Wow. In that time, your first calendar year, what was your favorite thing that you've experienced or done? I know that's kind of a tricky one. I'll keep talking.
I really, we joke about the presidential visit. I've never worked at a station or been in a city where the president was visiting and I was covering it. I have worked in places where we've had presidential candidates visit and come and do rallies and that kind of thing. And obviously, I didn't get to go to either the times the president was here this summer or this year, but I was on air covering it and helping with our live coverage of it. And that was thrilling for me as a political guy. I really enjoyed being able to take part in that and kind of cross that off the bucket list of talk about when a president's in town and cover it. And I know that we've had other political junkies that work for us. And Stephen Dial, again, he's not here, the slacker that he is, not taking part in the 41 Files podcast, but being involved with the press corps when the president was here a couple of weeks ago or a month or so ago. So that was really thrilling for me to be able to be involved in that. And people have joked with me too about moving here from Texas. The winter last year was not. I mean, even though it was not tons of snow, it was super cold for a little while last year, right around Christmas time, and not long after I got here. So I've already learned lessons from that. I don't know if I've ever talked about it on the podcast, but when being from Texas, whenever you're going to be out of town for a long time, especially in the cooler months, you just turn your air conditioning off at your house. That's just what you do to save a little bit of money. It's not going to be all that bad. What are you worried about? So I did that last Christmas and came back to ice coming out of my faucets and ice in my showers and toilets and all that kind of thing.
No.
Thankfully, it was a small fix and not a massive fix. I tell people it was the happiest $600 check I've ever written to the plumber to come and fix a couple of pipes that had burst, but had just popped off and there wasn't water damage all over the place. So I've already learned my lesson as a person living in a colder climate than Texas, and so I'm already feel more acclimated.
Wow, I will say I had a hard time reacclimating, even being from Illinois, being a Midwesterner, spending 2 years in Alabama.
I was going to say you were down south for a little while.
It softened me. It really softened me. I'm not quite as hardy as I once was.
Absolutely,
like very cold. I will say maybe one of my highlights of 2018 was running into you and the rest of the Hymnus men during Hymnus Men weekend. Mm-hmm. It was a delight.
That was at Legends.
Out at Legends. They had just gotten a lot of candy. They were jumping. One had picked up a rock.
Sure.
It was chaos.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
I have 3 little boys, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old twins, and their mom was out of town that weekend. And I am not a great at-home entertainer with the boys. Past hey, let's put on a movie, or hey, let's play this game. I'm not great at it, so I'm much more of a. And my dad jokes about this with me, that he's not. That I'll take the boys by myself some places. He's like, you're much more of a father than I ever was, being able to take kids. But I'm more comfortable loading the boys up in the van and going someplace than I am trying to keep them entertained at home all on a Saturday. So we were glad to run into you too.
Now, is that a situation? Have you ever considered the leash life? Because my parents did that with me when we were skiing. My mom would ski and launch my leash.
If I had just one, maybe, but I'm afraid I would look like I was dog walking if I put all 3 of them on a leash, and people would go, "Oh my God, the guy on 41 basically just takes his kids out for walks and brings them back home and puts them back in their kennels," which is not totally off base. So big things on the horizon for 2019. Kat Reed, thanks for joining me today for 41 Files. And again, we're sad that Stephen was not here for it, but I'm sure he would have had something substantive to add, but it would have been all Georgia talk.